Once there was a young student who carried the weight of poverty on his shoulders like an invisible burden. He was brilliant in his studies, hardworking in his efforts, yet his empty pockets and hungry nights often made him wonder whether his dreams of a better future would ever come true. His classmates wore nice clothes, bought expensive books, and moved ahead with ease, while he struggled to even afford a meal or pay his tuition. Life had taught him early that when you are poor, the world rarely pauses to notice your tears. Still, his heart was filled with hope, because he believed education would open the doors that poverty had locked against him. But one day, fate introduced him to someone who would change his life forever, in a way he never imagined. She was a woman of 71, a millionaire by every worldly standard, yet lonelier than anyone could ever know. Her husband had passed away years ago, her children were busy in their own worlds, and her mansion echoed more with silence than with laughter. She had money, properties, and influence, but her heart remained heavy with the ache of isolation. The world saw her as a symbol of success, but inside she felt like a tree full of golden leaves, standing all alone in a deserted field. The student met her unexpectedly, and in their very first conversation, she noticed something different in his eyes, an honesty, a kindness, and a hunger not just for food or wealth, but for dignity and meaning. They began to meet more often. Their bond was unusual and, to outsiders, even strange. People whispered when they saw a poor student talking to a wealthy elderly woman. Some mocked, some judged, some accused. They said the young man was only after her money, and that she was only trying to buy companionship. But what others failed to see was the quiet respect and genuine connection growing between them. For the first time in years, she felt heard. For the first time in his life, he felt valued beyond his poverty. Eventually, in a move that shocked everyone, they decided to marry. The news spread like wildfire. Neighbors gossiped, friends laughed, and relatives criticized. People pointed fingers at the young man, saying he was digging for gold, while others pitied the woman for making such a decision at her age. Yet, amidst all the noise, the two of them remained calm. He promised her that he would treat her with the respect and dignity she deserved, and she assured him that she would stand by him no matter how the world judged them. Their marriage was simple, without lavish decoration or noisy celebration, but filled with a strange and deep peace. 7 days after their marriage, something happened that the student would never forget. He was sitting in her study room, looking through some papers, when he stumbled upon a file filled with her handwritten notes and legal documents. His heart raced when he realized they were her will and property papers. At first, he thought she must have transferred all her wealth to him as people had speculated. But as he read, tears filled his eyes. She had not left a single penny for him. Instead, she had written in bold letters that all her fortune, her houses, her land, her bank accounts, would go to orphanages, schools for underprivileged children, and charities supporting widows and the homeless. His hands trembled as he held those papers. He was shocked, not because he was denied wealth, but because he realized the true meaning behind her actions. She had never intended to test him, yet she had given him the greatest lesson of life, that true wealth is not money but humanity. Her legacy was not the gold locked in banks, or the mansions built in her name, but the kindness she was sowing in the lives of those who needed it most. For the first time, he understood that her companionship with him was never about giving or taking wealth. It was about showing him that life's real treasure lies in how much good you leave behind. The student sat silently for hours, tears rolling down his face. He felt ashamed of the little corner in his heart that once thought maybe life had given him an easy escape from poverty through this marriage. But now, he realized that his destiny was far greater than comfort. It was a calling to carry forward the flame of kindness she had lit. When she entered the room and saw him holding those papers, he couldn't control himself. He fell at her feet, crying, and said, "You've given me the greatest gift of all, not money, not property, but a purpose. You've shown me what it truly means to live." She gently placed her hand on his head and said, "My child, people measure wealth by what they can keep in their safes, but real wealth is what you give away. Money disappears, but kindness remains in the hearts of people long after we are gone. I wanted someone who could understand this truth, and now I know you do." Her eyes glistened with tears, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief, knowing that someone young and full of life had now taken her vision as his own. From that day on, the student changed forever. He still studied, still worked, but his heart carried a new mission. He began volunteering at shelters, helping children with their studies, and visiting homes for the elderly. He realized that by giving his time, his skills, and his compassion, he could become richer than the wealthiest person alive. His marriage to her became a story that people continue to talk about. Some still mocked, some still misunderstood, but those who saw the truth were inspired. They saw that a poor boy and a wealthy woman had come together not for money, not for convenience, but for a lesson that touched every heart, that the most powerful inheritance you can leave is kindness. Years later, after she passed away peacefully, the student, now a man grown strong in wisdom, stood at her grave and whispered, "I will continue your legacy. I will make sure that your dream of helping others never dies." And true to his word, he did. He built schools where children studied without fear of fees. He supported shelters where the homeless found warmth and dignity. He funded libraries where poor students could read without cost. Each act of kindness became a brick in the monument of humanity that she had taught him to build. In the end, the student who once thought poverty was his biggest curse discovered that wealth had nothing to do with coins or notes. He understood that the richest person is not the one who has the most, but the one who gives the most. The millionaire woman had shown him this truth in just 7 days of marriage, and that truth lived in him for the rest of his life. So, whenever people ask what he gained from marrying her, he smiles softly and says, "I gained the greatest treasure of all, the understanding that true wealth is not money, but humanity." And that is the lesson that continues to echo in the hearts of those who hear his story, that kindness, compassion, and love are the only riches that never fade. He was a young student whose life was shaped by struggle and sacrifice. Every day he carried books that were borrowed, walked roads with shoes that were torn, and studied under the dim light of a flickering lamp. His family could not afford to support him, and every meal he ate felt like a blessing. Yet in his heart he carried a dream to rise above his poverty, to prove that hardship could not silence his determination. But what he did not know was that destiny had written for him a story that would be remembered not for wealth or fame, but for the power of love beyond judgment. She was 71 years old, a woman of grace, dignity, and wealth. To the world, she was a millionaire who had everything, mansions, businesses, and luxuries others could only imagine. But when she returned home at night, she found herself surrounded not by laughter, but by silence. Her children had built their own worlds, too busy to notice her loneliness. Friends had disappeared with time. She often sat in her garden, staring at the stars, wondering why life gave her riches but stole away companionship. People respected her for her power, but no one looked beyond her fortune to see her heart. Their paths crossed in the most ordinary way. He had taken a part-time job at a library to cover his fees. She visited the library often, finding comfort in books since they did not judge her, question her, or make her feel old. The student helped her with heavy books one evening, and she noticed something in his eyes, an honesty and warmth she had not seen in years. He was polite, respectful, and unlike others, he spoke to her not as the millionaire woman, but as a human being. Their conversations grew from simple greetings to long discussions about life, dreams, and pain. Soon their bond deepened. She admired his resilience, how he faced poverty yet never allowed bitterness to poison his heart. He admired her wisdom, how she had endured loneliness yet continued to live with dignity. Slowly they became each other's comfort, But when their companionship turned into marriage, society erupted with judgment. The news spread like wildfire. People laughed, mocked, and whispered. Some said the young man had married her for her wealth. Others said she was foolish to marry someone so young, claiming it was desperation. Relatives called it shameful, friends called it absurd, and strangers treated it like a scandal. They became a story people loved to discuss but never to understand. Yet, amidst the noise of criticism, they chose silence. They did not explain themselves to the world, because they knew the world had already decided its verdict. Instead, they lived for each other, creating a small universe where respect, care, and compassion mattered more than the cruel whispers outside their door. When she fell ill, he held her hand and stayed awake by her bedside. When his exams drew near, she encouraged him, reminding him that education was his true strength. The young man often heard taunts from his peers. Some said, "Why waste your youth on an old woman?" Others laughed behind his back. He sold himself for money. But he carried himself with quiet pride because he knew the truth. Their bond was not built on greed or desperation, but on love beyond judgment. He respected her not for what she owned, but for who she was. She cared for him not because he was young, but because he was sincere. Together, they proved that love is not measured by age, wealth, or the approval of others. It is measured by how deeply two souls understand each other. 7 days into their marriage, the young man discovered something that changed him forever. He came across her will while organizing some papers. His heart pounded as he read through it. Contrary to what people believed, she had not left her wealth to him. Instead, every penny of her fortune was written in the name of orphanages, schools for underprivileged children, and shelters for the homeless. Tears welled up in his eyes as he realized the depth of her kindness. She had married him not to give him riches, but to teach him the greatest lesson of his life, that love and legacy are not about possessions, but about humanity. When he looked at her after reading those words, he felt no disappointment, only admiration. She had shown him that real love is not about gaining, but about giving, and in that moment, he knew that even if the world never understood their bond, he would cherish it for the rest of his life. Time passed, and their marriage became a living testimony that compassion can silence judgment. He stood by her in her final years, not as a gold digger as the world assumed, but as a husband who respected her soul. She, in turn, left behind not only a legacy of charity, but also the lesson that love needs no explanation when it is true. Years later, after her passing, the young man, now wiser and more mature, often shared their story with others. People still raised their eyebrows, some still doubted, but many began to see the beauty in what they had shared. He told them society will always judge what it does not understand, but love, real love, is beyond judgment. It is built on respect, compassion, and the courage to stand by someone when the world turns against you. His life became a continuation of her dream. He dedicated himself to the causes she had supported, building schools, helping orphans, and supporting the poor. Each act of kindness was his tribute to her memory, his way of honoring the love that had changed his life. Whenever someone asked him what he gained from marrying her, he smiled and said, "I gained something more valuable than all her wealth. I learned that true love needs no approval, and compassion is richer than gold." Their story slowly transformed from gossip into inspiration. People began to realize that love is not meant to be measured by the scale of age or wealth. It is not society's job to approve or reject a bond. It is the hearts involved that matter. Respect, care, and compassion can create a love so powerful that even time cannot erase it. In the end, the world may remember her as a millionaire, but he remembers her as the woman who taught him the greatest truth of all, that love beyond judgment is the rarest and purest form of love, one that can heal, inspire, and last forever. He was a young student, born into a world where poverty seemed to follow him like a shadow that never faded. His days were spent chasing knowledge, while his nights were filled with worry about how he would pay for tomorrow's meal or his tuition. Yet he carried in his heart a fire that refused to die, the fire of education, the hope that one day he would change not just his own destiny, but perhaps someone else's too. Still, life often made him doubt. Surrounded by classmates who had everything he lacked, books, clothes, even security, he sometimes asked himself whether his struggle was worth it. But then, fate brought him face to face with a woman who would alter the course of his life forever. She was 71 years old, wealthy beyond imagination. Mansions, businesses, cars, and servants all stood as proof of her fortune. To the world, she was untouchable, a symbol of success. But behind the doors of her grand home, she was achingly lonely. Her children had drifted away, her friends had vanished with time, and her heart was weary of the silence that wealth could not fill. When the student met her, it was not planned, nor did it seem like destiny at first glance. She saw in him an honesty that was rare, and he saw in her a gentleness hidden beneath the armor of wealth. What began as casual conversations soon grew into a companionship that defied logic. Their bond turned into marriage, and with that decision, the world exploded with judgment. People accused the young man of chasing her fortune, and they called her foolish for marrying someone so young. Yet they both ignored the harshness of society. She found in him the respect she had longed for, and he found in her a kindness that made his struggles feel lighter. Together, they created a small world where love and care mattered more than money or age. But then, just 7 days into their marriage, the young man stumbled upon something that would forever shift the way he saw life. While sorting through her documents, he discovered her will. His heart raced, expecting to find proof of what everyone had been whispering, that her wealth would now belong to him. But what he found instead brought tears to his eyes. Not a single penny was written in his name. Instead, every ounce of her fortune was dedicated to the poor, the orphans, and to building schools and libraries for underprivileged children. He sat still, the papers trembling in his hands. His first reaction was shock, but quickly that shock melted into realization. She had never married him to make him rich. She had chosen him because she believed he could carry her vision forward. The vision that true wealth is not what you keep, but what you give away to others. At that moment, he understood that money, no matter how vast, fades away, but kindness and generosity plant seeds that live forever. When she entered the room and saw his tear-stained face, she smiled gently. He fell at her feet, ashamed that he had ever secretly wished for her wealth. But she lifted him up and said softly, "The world measures wealth in coins and notes, but the highest form of wealth is what you give to the poor, the hungry, and the children who dream but have no means to chase their dreams. If you truly want to be rich, dedicate your life to serving them." Those words became his life's compass. From that day onward, he no longer saw poverty as his enemy, but as his teacher. He began to dedicate his time to helping children who, like him, could not afford books or fees. He visited shelters, taught orphans, and gave his evenings to tutoring students who were on the verge of giving up. The joy he saw in their eyes filled him with a richness he had never known. Every smile of a child who learned to read, every tear of gratitude from a mother who could not pay for her child's school, became his treasure. The world continued to judge him. Some mocked him for not inheriting her wealth, saying he had wasted his chance. Others could not understand why he worked tirelessly without seeking riches, but he no longer cared about their opinions. He had found a higher purpose, one that money could never buy. The lesson she had given him became his strength, that giving to the poor and supporting education is the highest form of wealth. As years passed, he transformed her vision into reality. Schools rose in villages where children once roamed the streets aimlessly. Libraries opened in towns where knowledge had been a distant dream. Scholarships were given to students who reminded him of himself, hungry, poor, but burning with determination. His life became the very proof that one act of kindness, one powerful lesson, could create ripples of change that touched countless lives. And whenever he felt tired, he remembered her smile, her gentle words, and the truth she had planted in him. Standing before a classroom filled with children one day, he whispered to himself, "This is wealth. This is what it means to live rich." In the end, people who once doubted him began to admire him. His name became associated not with scandal, but with service. The poor student who once had nothing became a beacon of hope for others, and all because one woman, in her wisdom, had chosen to show him that life's true riches lie in giving. So when he grew old, and people asked him what he had gained from marrying her, he never mentioned money, property, or luxury. Instead, he said with pride, "I gained a life-changing lesson. I learned that supporting the poor and giving children the gift of education is the greatest form of wealth. And because of her, I have lived not as a rich man, but as a man who gave." And that is the legacy that outlives them both. A reminder to the world that wealth locked in safes will vanish, but wealth spent on humanity will live forever.